What is a supernatural event that happened in your life that just cannot be explained? Early into my now wife and I's relationship, I had a dream about her and childbirth, very vivid and long, like I spent days in the hospital with her and everything was in a strange twilight. When it came time to deliver, things went very wrong and she and baby ended up passing away. I woke up quite shook naturally but brushed it off. I am a nurse and have had to deal with traumatic situations before, and I choked it up to me dealing with that stress through a dream. 6 years later and my wife is pregnant. I have forgotten the dream by now. I get a call late into the 3rd trimester while I am on shift. Wife is going to the ER for a bad BP. I get off my shift and go to meet her. As soon as I step into the room I remember my dream. It's the same damn room, which is extra spooky because the hospital we were at wasn't even built when I had the dream. This is last year, right when lockdown started. My wife is admitted they want to wait a week to deliver if possible. She will be kept in a twilight state until that time. So it's me in this room eerily isolated as the world around us is frozen and my wife is incoherent mere feet away. Lingering for days in this room I brushed off my dream, trying to manage my anxiety and stress. Come showtime my wife gets ready to begin pushing and it's exactly the same scenario as my dream. Things start going poorly, but the doctor thinks delivery is still possible. But at this point I finally freak out into full panic, and demand a C-section for my wife. The doctor I can tell wants to argue but I think my outburst made her step back and reassess the situation and she made the call for emergency C-section. Took 10 minutes for me to get taken back and as I'm in the OR I see my baby come out lifeless. They do everything they can and manage to resuscitate her. In the meantime my wife is doing poorly and they are scrambling to control her bleeding. I follow the baby out knowing there's really nothing I can do. Baby gets life flighted to another hospital. But before we go I see my wife stable and headed to the ICU. Both my wife and baby are critical but alive. Today they are both thriving and my baby is 16 months and just a tornado of energy. I don't know that they would be alive if not for that dream and it causing me to freak out and demand a change in plan. Fuck man, this one hit me. I had vivid daydreams about my wife dying in childbirth. Through her whole pregnancy, she had to get induced 2 weeks early for high BP. After 18 hours of stalled labor they said they needed to do a C-section. After my daughter was born, my wife, who is a doctor, says, "Don't panic, but the drug they just ordered, I'm bleeding out." We had long discussions before the birth that if the baby had to go to recovery I would go with the baby. No matter what. I told her I loved her and followed the baby. It was the longest hour of my life. My wife is healthy and fine, but she said she saw the look in my eyes that I truly believed I was saying goodbye and it broke her heart. Many years ago, my parents had separated and my father was planning on taking a trip across the country to California. He was pretty excited about it. I talked to him the day before he's leaving. Wish him well and tell him I'll talk to him after he gets to California. The day of his trip, he calls me and tells me he decided last minute not to go. Refuses to really get into why. Just says he changed his mind. Seemed really odd for something that he had been planning for a couple months. That night I'm sitting at my girlfriend's house and we're watching the news, and they report that U.S. Air Flight 1493, the flight my dad was supposed to be on, collided with another aircraft while landing in Los Angeles. About 25% of the people on the flight were killed. Hard to know how my dad would have made out, because it really depended on where you were sitting, front versus back of the plane. It was several months before he finally told me that night before he was supposed to leave. He had an extremely vivid dream that he died in a fiery plane crash, so vivid that it scared him out of flying that day. My dad is a Marine Corps Vietnam veteran who saw combat. I can only imagine how vivid the dream must have been, to scare him out of getting on that plane that morning. Edit. Believe it or not, I've never actually watched Final Destination. Now I have to see it. Super minor compared to many in this thread. Night before Thanksgiving 3 years ago I was across the country at my parents'. driving back to theirs with my now wife from a friend's house. As we draw near, there is some type of bundle in the middle of the road. I stopped and pulled off to move it, and it turned out to be a barred owl that got clipped by a car. Long story short, I spent the rest of that night getting the owl into a puppy cage, gave it some food and water, and the next day dropped it off at a wildlife rescue center. I got home the next week, all the way across the country, New Jersey to Oregon. I stepped outside and there was a barred owl sitting on my fence watching me. It was gone by the time I got back, but now I know I'm straight with all owls. This didn't happen to me, but a very nice old man and his wife used to live a few streets over from us. Well, she got very sick and his son flew in to help watch and care for her. A few weeks later she moved to hospice and later died. The night she died, her husband and son drive home and they were talking about what to do for the funeral, and the husband asked, "Do you think she'd want some person to attend?" And they both said they heard the dead wife in the back seat saying no thank you. I have an idea of what may have happened, but I cannot definitively say how this happened. My father died in 2000 in my parents' house. I was over one night pretty late after my mother had gone to sleep. I swear I could feel my father's presence, as I was right in the spot where he had died. They believe he had a heart attack while laying on the couch, tried to get off the couch to call for help but fell on the floor and died, though no one else was home when it happened. I was on the couch when this happened. Anyway, I thought to myself, this is stupid. People don't leave essences behind. I'm not feeling anything. So, I say out loud, "If this is really you, Dad," knock a box of cereal off the shelf onto the floor. I wanted to pick something I didn't think could happen by accident. I went into the kitchen and watched the shelf with the cereal on it for a few minutes and nothing happened. Since it was almost midnight, I decided to sleep in my old bedroom. I woke up the next morning and went downstairs and a box of cereal was laying on the floor. I say to my mother, "Did you knock that cereal onto the floor?" She said no, it was like that when she woke up. So, what the fuck, man? However, my mother had a cat. I'm guessing the cat did it, but I don't know for sure. If she'd gotten on the shelf, everything would have been knocked around and messy from her. Everything else was in its normal position. Just a box of cereal was on the floor. I mean, regardless, it has to have been the cat, right? Edit. My mother also told me, months before this happened, that she felt my father get in bed with her one night after he died. She said, "Go away, Greg, you're dead. You don't need to go to bed anymore." And she says she felt him get out of the bed after that. Weird. My mother despised my father by the end of his life, though they remained married. It's not surprising she told him to GTFO. My mother died a day or two after my daughter's 5th birthday. I saw her in the day of the party. When I didn't, I was finally able to have a seat. I sat next to her and something didn't feel right. She had become very bloated and I told her. She said it was from her medicine and she was given water pills that would help. I still didn't feel right, but I was so preoccupied with the party that I didn't delve deeper. She had a heart attack. I was usually the one to push her or bring her to doctor visits, and I very much so regret not trying to that day or the next. I love and miss you every day. Having 2 serious suicide attempts in the past myself, I can say that there is nothing anyone, even my closest of friends and family, could have said to me to have changed my course of action either time. I am fortunate to be alive and am finally in a good place, but when I was preparing to leave life behind me, I was just not reachable. I don't mean to say that it is hopeless trying to help those who are suicidal, but that's such an incredible amount of pain to be carrying that getting through it and through to the person holding it is miracle level stuff when it happens. I hope you can get past the regret. That's heavy stuff. My buddy and I were playing tennis one night at some courts by my house. Lights usually went out at 11, but for whatever reason that night they went off at a weird time, like 10:43. Whatever, that was weird. We collected our stuff and started walking to my car about 500 feet from the courts. My buddy's mom pulls up right as we're getting to my car and goes, "Where the hell have you been? I called your cell and some guy was just laughing. It didn't sound like you. It was then my buddy realized he didn't have his phone on him. He told his mom to call his cell again and we could see it light up in the middle of the court we were playing on, by the net, but still definitely in between the single lines, not at all where we kept the rest of our stuff. He goes and gets it and only has the one missed call from his mom. The one she just made. He asked if she called the right number and her call log showed 3 calls to his phone all that night. We can't explain why the cell was on the court or what happened with the calls or what happened with the lights. It was surreal. I was out with my parents, and it was late coming back home. At around 2:30 a.m. we were at a traffic signal. A homeless guy comes and knocks on the window of the seat where my mother was sitting. As she rolled down the window to give him money, he said, "Check what is happening at your brother's house." He proceeded to take the money and walked away. Probably thinking that he was a bit crazy in the head, we didn't bother and went home. Next morning Mom gets a call from her brother's wife. He has had a heart attack, at 2:30 a.m. When I was a kid, about 10-12ish, I was carrying a load of laundry upstairs home alone while Mom was out doing errands. We have this weird carpet runner over our hardwood stairs that's only really attached at the top of the flight but otherwise not fitted or secured to each individual stair, so naturally I step on an air bubble of carpet with my vision obscured by the laundry and fall backwards while bear hugging a bunch of blankets. I specifically remember thinking, "Welp, guess I'm about to die," while almost airborne with just my big toe left on the carpet when I felt 2 hands, one on either side of my shoulder blades, give me a firm shove that launched me back up on the step and diagonally against the stair rail. I assumed Mom somehow silently came back early without announcing herself and turned around to thank her while still clinging to the railing. But no one was there. I scurried upstairs to put my things down while calling her name and walked the house afterwards to check if any doors were unlocked or if her car was there. I finally resorted to calling her cell where she told me she was hitting up a few more stores. It still feels like there's a presence on that stairwell, like someone's watching, but in a protective way rather than sinisterly. Thanks for all the awards. I'll have to holler to the stairway ghost and let it know the internet loves it. We had a stair ghost too. When my mom was heavily pregnant, she used to sit in front of the fire in the den with the dogs at her feet. One night, both dogs jerked awake and proceeded to watch someone climb the spiral staircase, but nobody was there. She's pretty sure it was her mom, checking that our bedroom, twins, was ready for us coming, because the dogs were calm and she said she just felt this really reassuring presence. Fast forward 6-ish years and I woke up one night to find my mom sitting at the end of my bed and basically running a soothing hand up and down my leg. Said to her the next day that it was really nice, or something along those lines. I was young, and she was absolutely terrified because she didn't come into our room. My mom is the spitting image of her mom, so I'm guessing it was my grand soothing me back to sleep. I have 2 incidents like that. When I was a small child I had no fat on me and dense bones. In water, I would sink like a stone. I also couldn't swim. I was at a pool with no lifeguard. All occupants were in the shallow end. I fell in the deep end and started sinking. I knew I was gonna die, but someone pushed me up and my mom saw my arms flailing. I felt someone push me out as she grabbed me. I turned back to see who saved me, but there was no one. The second experience found me riding my bike. I was 14, with my baby sister, she was 9. I was going pretty fast when she turned in front of me. My bike flipped and I went flying over my sister. I felt hands grab me under my arms. I felt like I floated as I landed on my feet. My little sister looked at me with wide eyes and asked, "How did you do that?" "You floated in the air." Neither of us have any explanation, but it broke my bike. To this day my sister and I still talk about it. There was no way I should have flown off my bike the way I did, nor could I have launched myself high enough to land on my feet, or as high as my sister said I floated. My son, now 10, was 4 and was able to name my grandmother, by name, by a picture of her when she was in her 20s that was in storage that my mom and I were going through. She died before my wife and I even met. He said she was the lady who taught him how to do his silly laugh. Context: His silly laugh, as we called it, was a laugh that sounded just like my grandmother's. The reason it was so specific and silly was that my grandmother had a brain aneurysm when my mom was in her teens. It paralyzed the left of her body, including vocal cords and lips, and gave her a very distinct and odd-sounding laugh. I had a dream once about my high school best friend who had moved out of state and started a family. I hadn't seen her or spoken to her in at least 10 years and had never met her child, except seeing pictures/posts on Facebook and commenting on them. In my dream, I was walking down a street at night and out of nowhere her little girl appears next to me and I asked her, "Where is your mama? Why are you by yourself?" I remember her taking me to some bushes near a random house on the street and finding my friend in bad shape, beaten up or something, on the ground, and I remember running to the door of the random house screaming for help and to call the police. This is all I can recall from the dream, but I think there may have been a little more. The next day, I wake up and think to myself, man, that was weird. Maybe I dreamt of her because we had just spoken a little in comments of a Facebook post. I should send her a message. I go on about my day, go to work, get home later that day and sit on my couch and scroll through Facebook. Bam! 1,000 posts, rest in peace, etc. All of them tagged my friend and her daughter. I thought, what in the actual FCK? At that point there was no information as to what had happened, so I thought it must have been a car accident or something. Over the course of the next few weeks to months, more and more information came out and it was not an accident. My friend and her sweet baby had been murdered by some animal. I won't refer to them as a person. This happened about 5 years ago. I still remember the main parts of the dream vividly. I still am a little horrified that I had this dream that night, when it was happening possibly. I haven't been able to tell anyone else about it either because just thinking about it gives me chills. I live in a city and my brother lives in another city that is around 1,000 kilometers away. He visits sometimes but not quite often, on an average of once every 2 years. On one day around 7 seconds ago I was sleeping on the couch in the living room at my apartment. I woke up suddenly on my brother sitting just beside me and I was shocked. Surprised, started greeting him and asking him about how is he doing and what pleasant surprise it was. Next thing I realized that this was a dream as the doorbell was ringing, which woke me. Went to open the door and guess what? It was my brother who came to surprise us. This literally had me speechless. Don't have any explanation and I think sometimes you don't need to have one. Working as night security for a small office at a sanitation plant. Building was a single entrance and you had to check in at the security station to get in or out. A worker shows up and checks in saying he needs to take care of a few things and grab some stuff. So I check in his ID and flip a few lights for him, then go back about my business. Fast forward a few hours and my shift is about to end. I still haven't seen the guy come back, so I go patrol the building to find him and literally can't find him anywhere. He's not in any of the areas I turn lights on for him, no other lights are on, and he's not in any other rooms. I stop by security to see if we just missed each other and he's trying to leave, but nobody is there. I do a second patrol and still no signs. At this point I went to check cameras to see where he went, but he's not on a single camera except the one covering the entrance and security station. He turns down a hallway and never shows up on the next camera down said hall. At this point I lagged it as an incident, and GTFO right as the relief shift showed up. Next day my boss calls me and says that worker had been on vacation out of state for several days, and wouldn't return for several more. Nobody could offer any explanation to what happened. Already posted this a year and a half ago, but I'll go again. I have to make a bit of a premise. When I was little, the woman that came to clean my house, I'll call her Mary, while my parents were working, was also my babysitter. Usually after she ended up cleaning she would bring me to her house until my mom would come and pick me up. There during the year one knew her whole family, among these was her husband that I'll call Dave. So Dave was a pretty cool guy. Just the average elder you would find in any rural town. He liked to drink wine with his friends at the bar, go hunting, and he had a lot of good and interesting stories to tell me when I was a kid. and after all these years spent together he basically considered me as a grandson. Now back when COVID hit for the first time in my country, I had a dream one night where Mary was coming to my house to clean as every other week, but this time in my living room there was a closed black coffin. When I asked her what was in there, she looked at me and said in a sad tone, "Dave is inside there." Now if that wasn't strange enough, I remember waking up later that night and feeling a presence to the side of my bed, and I distinctly remember to have said while still being half asleep, "Come on Dave, let me get back to sleep." Next morning when I woke, my parents told me that Mary had called saying that Dave had passed that night due to COVID complication. To this day I still haven't told anyone about it, and I am still a bit freaked out from the whole story. Also sorry for format and grammar, but I'm on mobile and English isn't my first language.